To have you for this conversation. You are an inspiring leader. You are the former mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, a place that I love very much. And they were under good care in your leadership because you have beautiful values for which you lead from. And being in a position like that in a place that has a lot of challenges and requires a lot of resilience, I'm sure you've learned so much about steward leadership, transformational leadership, how to lead through crisis. You're now very focused on climate and how we create resilient communities and cities. And I'm honored to have you here. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much, Charlene, and everybody that is listening and will listen to this podcast like session. And let me say, one of the first things that I learned about stewardship leadership is gratitude. One should be grateful for everything. So let me begin by being grateful to Jeff Karp, Dr. Jeff Karp, for introducing me to you and for making sure that you and I connected, that I got a hold of you. I'm dyslexic, and as we talked about, I do all the administration by myself. So sometimes I'm running a little behind, and I really appreciated Jeff's guarding me through this process. And the two other things that I'll say about the things that Jeff was talking about is that he also exemplifies two very important things about leading with hope. Hope is not an esoterical thing. It is not a romantic thing. I always say that hope is love in motion. But one of the things is that Jeff speaks a lot, what you call intentionality, I call recognizing where you're at, recognizing what your limits are at. And the book Lit, which I read from cover to cover before I met Jeff the day that I bought the book. And we met at a pizzeria in Boston, in Cambridge, named Pinocchio's. And he brought me another copy of his book without knowing that I had just come from buying the book. So that knowing where you're at and knowing your limits. So gratitude, knowing what you're at, knowing your limits, but also knowing not only where you want to go, but why you want to get there. For the people in the audience that know what there's Yogi Bear, the cartoon. Yogi Bear and Boo Boo, his little friend. Yogi Bear used to say, "You don't know if you don't know where you're going, you will get there, right? Because you will get nowhere because you don't know where you're going." The flip side of that is what Jeff was talking about is like, and you mentioned being intentional. When you're leading with hope, you have to know not only where you're going, but why do you want to get there? And the why, it's important because issues like equitable treatment of people, equal access to services, equity in the distribution of services in a crisis, and those things are very important in everyday life. You and I were talking about yesterday, and I said, it's funny because people think that the only crises going on are the ones that we see on TV. But every school board today in the US is confronting problems when they want to decide, do we want to ban this book? Books should not be banned, but those are the decisions that are being made. Do we want to ban this book versus not doing that? And those are crises in our communities. A parent that cannot get access for their children, autistic child, that's a crisis. A divorce, that's a crisis. So we all cannot underestimate the micro crises that goes on. I call it the hurricane within. Because of course, in Puerto Rico in 2017, we had to confront two hurricanes. So that hurricane within, that crisis that we all carry within ourselves, and that also extends, like, of course, the reason why we're having this chat today also is to do some fundraising for the people that are risking their lives or have risked their lives in California, or firefighters, firemen and firewomen. So it's important that people understand why we want to get somewhere, because that's the only way that you will be able to direct hope in the right direction. And there is a right direction and a wrong direction for hope.
Hmm. So I want to first start by also thanking Jeff. And I love that you started there, not just for gratitude, but what gives me a lot of hope is, and power is relationships. And so Jeff connected you and I'm about to connect you with a couple people. And that's how it just unfolds. And we meet the people we're meant to meet. And I think true abundance and resilience often comes through our network and our community. And we have to be in this more collaborative time and be willing to share and make connections. And it's so joyful. Jeff connected us. That brought me joyfulness. I'm about to make a couple connections with you and people that might be supportive for what you're working on and for them. And that feels so just organic and natural and empowering. And so I just want to underline that because I think there's been a lot of selfishness in the American culture, not so much in the Puerto Rican. Puerto Ricans loved, they're very community oriented generally. In the US and Western culture can often be very, people are afraid they don't have what they need, enough time, enough money, enough resources. It's very protective, defensive. And so to be willing and to open up and make connections and connect the dots for people, I think is such an important skill of leadership. So I just wanted to underline that. And then you just ended by saying that, crisis often illuminates all the smaller crises that are already happening. And so I know that you look at opportunity, these big crises that garner a lot of attention and energy. You look at them as opportunities to not just bounce back, but to actually transform. So speak to us about transformational leadership and how you see these opportunities to truly transform.
Yeah, let me first tell you that I was forced into transformational leadership. I was mayor of San Juan between 2013 and 2020. And of course, on my last 2 terms, because we have 4-year terms here, on my last term, we hit Zika and chikungunya, 2 new diseases caused by the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which were not in Puerto Rico, and we didn't know how to deal with them, or when we were told how to deal with them, there were a lot of negative consequences to the types of pesticides that we were supposed to use. Number 2, we had the 2 hurricanes, Irma and Maria, category 4 with gusts of category 5, which left, because of the botched effort, left more than 3,000 Puerto Ricans dead, and almost the island nation of Puerto Rico, almost for a year, without electrical power. I myself lived in a shelter for 4 months. My home was okay. I didn't have water or electricity, but I live in a walk-up, so the structure remained. But I thought, if we have people living in shelters, as the mayor, I should also live in those shelters. It was also an issue of rapid response. Then we had a political unrest where we unseated a sitting governor, had 3 governors in 1 week. There were protests for 14 days before we unseated the governor, who was forced to resign. There was the bankruptcy of the state government of Puerto Rico and what that meant to each of the 78 municipalities. There were 2 earthquakes, 6.0 earthquakes in Puerto Rico, and then the pandemic. So that's all. And I got a divorce in the middle of all that. So that's that's all in the span of 5 years. So what do you do when your life is a crisis? And not only your life is a crisis, but you are at the head of an organization that is going to, not supposed to, that is chartered to service people in that crisis, in those crises. The first thing you do is you understand one thing, and it is that in a crisis, there are only 2 options. One is you stand up and speak up, whether you have a microphone, a platform in front of you or not, and ask and demand to be treated with dignity. Or you stand down and become quiet and eventually complicit with a narrative that will end up hurting yourself. So that's it. And I, at the beginning, I asked you to call me Jolene, and I'll tell you now why and where I got that from. I'm second generation removed from poverty. My great grandfather was a sugarcane plantation worker. My grandmother was the first one in her family to learn to read and write. And she told us always that education was a great equalizer. So her father, who was my great grandfather, would cut sugarcane for 6 months and then would take on to the ocean to fish. So he liked maps, he couldn't read, but he would point at places in maps and he would give each one of his daughters and sons a nickname from a place in the map. So Jilin is the name of a city near the Yellow Sea in China. There's no Chinese in our family, but that was her nickname. And it became my name and it became my daughter's middle name. But that woman who was like 4 feet 11 inches, I'm 4'11" and a half. That half is very important. One day came to pick me up from school. I had a little bit of a cut lip and a little bit of a blood in my nose. And at that moment, to this day, you would call it being bullied, right? At that moment, it was just a fight in the playground. So she asked me what happened. I started to cry and she said, "Did you start the fight?" And I said, "No." "Did you finish the fight?" And my little lips started trembling. You know that thing the lip does when you want to cry, but you know you'll be in deeper trouble if you do. So she said, "This is what you're going to do." And she told me what to do. Now, for everybody listening, I'm a pacifist. This was in the 60s, so it's a different story. We used to have these lunch boxes that are made out of metal. Now they're collector's items, and they had a very thick thermos inside with glass, the kind that it would break, right? So she told me, "Look, if he does this to you again," it was a boy, "you're going to hit him as hard as you can. You're going to run as fast as you can, and you're going to scream as loud as you can." So I did it. She got called into the teacher's, classroom. When she walked in, I had a little bit of a bloody nose, and she said, "Did you start the fight?" And I said, "No." And with a big smile, I said, "But I finished it." They were giving me hell. They were giving me hell, I don't know what's going on. She's such a good student. She's such a nice girl, blah, blah, blah. And my grandmother finally stood up, 4 feet and 11, and said, "That's interesting." When she was getting hit in the playground, nobody said anything. But the day she stands up for herself, and the day she decides she's had enough of this, then everybody's now blaming her. Well, she looked at me and she said, "Pick up your stuff, we're leaving." And as far as I'm concerned, she has every right to take care of herself. And as we walked out and when we got into the car, she said, "You listen to me. You have every right to take care of yourself, but you have a responsibility to take care of those that cannot take care of themselves." I was 6 or 7 years old. I'm going to be 62 next week, and I still have those words tattooed in my soul. Because you see, if you take responsibility for yourself without taking responsibility for those that can truly not take care of themselves, then you're only doing half of the work that you were meant to be. And remember, I told you, hope is love in motion. And what it really meant is that either I used the platform that I had to speak up against what was happening in Puerto Rico at the time of the hurricanes, or I was quiet and said nothing and played nice, right? Now think about when has change taken place when people have played nice? Change doesn't take place when you play nice. Because change in itself is the disruption of the way things are. And there's always going to be somebody that is happy with the way things are. And that in order to silence you, in order to quiet you, in order not to make change progress and move along, will label you as something bad, wrong, etc. Look, women that wanted women to vote were told all kinds of things, but they persevered. So what the second thing I learned about man dealing with a crisis and leading in surrounded by hope is that you have to be comfortable, which is difficult, with your role as an instigator. Because when you're instigating change, and think about what you were mentioning in the political environment that we're living right now all over the world. When you're instigating change, or when you're stopping change that took literally blood, sweat, and tears to take place, what you are doing is you are demanding to be treated with dignity in front of those that don't recognize your dignity. So you have to understand that they're going to come for you. That doesn't mean it's easy. That doesn't mean it's less painful. That's why some of the techniques that Jeff talked about before in the session before are important. Because yeah, there are times that we have to lick our wounds and give ourselves a little time. But that second thing, the first one is understand that you either stand up or speak up, or end up hurting yourself. This being comfortable with your role as an instigator, and being comfortable with the role as an instigator also leads you to understand that change doesn't happen by the power of one. Change happens by the power of many, and that you can find leadership in the most unexpected places. When I would go into a community to provide services or provide food and water in the midst of the hurricane, I would say to the young people, can you come over and help us and create a chain of, and undoubtedly they would say, you see that old lady that's sitting over there? If she tells me to help you, I'll help you, because you may be the mayor outside of this community, but she's the mayor here. So you have to recognize, and you must recognize, what seems to be informal leadership. But no, it's very formal. It's just not formal in the way that people are used to perceiving leadership. Because it is the leadership that is there at the community level, at the grassroots level, all the time. And when you recognize that leadership is found in the most unexpected places, then you don't feel alone.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't feel alone, you're willing and able to push forward much more than you thought you would.
This is a beautiful message, a call to each of us to use our voice, to stand up for something, to be willing to, and to see ourselves as leaders that have a responsibility to enact change and an opportunity. And you started our conversation earlier on about knowing what your why is, your purpose. And you also said you're a pacifist, which means that I imagine being an instigator has not always been comfortable. And so how do you think about instigator in an integral way? Like, what have you learned from when you've seen change happen, either at the grassroots organic level or at a higher, more systems level? What have you seen be effective so that we can think, because there's also instigators right now that are just kind of causing more harm than good. And so tell us a vision of being a good instigator.
And it's like John Lewis, right? The good kind of trouble.
Exactly.
One thing is that the right kind of instigator brings people together. That doesn't mean that we don't have differences. It means that we find our common ground. And our common ground, so Julene, how do you know when a common ground is the right common ground? Because it opens up spaces. It doesn't make them smaller. That's my alarm for the hour of the divine mercy. So it opens up spaces. It doesn't make them smaller. And let me give you a couple of examples, which may sound harsh for people at the beginning. I'm pro-life. I believe in a woman's right to decide what happens with her own body. But it's so simple. If you do not believe in abortion, don't have an abortion. You have control over your body. Why would you want to have control over somebody else's body? If you don't believe in egalitarian marriage, don't marry someone from your same sex. Why would you want to have control over why other people love who they love? If you don't think in vitro fertilization is right for you, don't do it. So these are three actions that are done in the privacy of my own area, of my own adulthood, as long as they're adults that consent, right? Of my own adulthood, which really don't harm anyone else. They only harm, and I'm going to do this a lot, harm someone else if you believe that I have the right to control your life. So a good instigator opens up spaces, doesn't make them smaller. That's number one. Number two, we look at common grounds. We bring people together and we say, okay, we don't agree on this. Let's park that to the right. Let's see what we agree on. If you talk to people and say, most people would agree that we should find a cure for cancer. So you ended up with Jeff speaking about intentionality, and let's take that up again right now. And you and I talked about this yesterday when President Kennedy said, we will put a man in the moon within the next 10 years. He was very intentional and very focused, and he brought people together in communities. When I have seen change, real change happen, it is because people have understood, one, what is at stake, two, what they will lose, because you have to know what you can win and what they will lose. Really, and three, they have decided, intentionally decided. They have made a point of saying, we're going to focus on this and we're going to solve it. And when you look again at lives, at human history, there are so many instances of when we said, we're going to eradicate polio. Boom, it's done. We're going to, if we wanted to say we're going to eradicate poverty, we could literally do that. But then the other thing about being a good instigator, to tie that up, is that good instigator always acts as an eye opener for people to understand what's in it for me. It is very interesting that sometimes we hear people talking about tariffs, which are being imposed now, and say, no, we're not going to pay the tariffs. The country is going to pay the tariffs. And then when they're explaining, no, what that happens is that if you're going to buy a bottle of water and the bottle of water is coming into the US, the person that brings in the bottle of water will take in 25% more and will charge you 25% more. And then they say, oh, well, that's a problem. So an instigator opens the eyes and also acts as an educator, understands, puts the facts, real facts, puts the facts in front of people and say, is this what you want? Given the opportunity, most people will always choose what's best, not only for them, but the instigator, the good instigator also says, what's good for the geese is good for the gander. So let's make sure that we act in a space of collaboration.
Okay, so you think about leadership as love, love as action. What do you think about that? When you say leadership is love, what does that mean to you?
It means that we go into it for a cause higher than ourselves, not to get your name spoken in large crowds or a lot of people applauding at you, because when it's all said and done, at some point the microphone is turned off or the internet goes off like it just happened for us here. And you are just, I can guarantee you from personal experience, it isn't the smiles of the people that you help and the hugs of the people that you help save. It is the silent and quiet sorrow of those that you never got a chance to be in front of that haunts you forever. So it is the quiet mother that is sitting in a hospital and didn't have enough money to take their child to a doctor. It is the responsibility of ensuring that an immigrant family stays together. It is the responsibility for a child that has been raped and now faces this really horrible situation of what am I going to do with my life? It is men and women that just want to put food on the table. It is the understanding that we're put here on earth to make life better for one another. It is very simple. I know that what I'm about to say is going to sound a little shocking, but I've never met one child that says, when I grow old, I want to be a prostitute. Never. They always want to be a doctor, a nurse, a fireman, a policeman. You know, they're just forced into conditions that are structural conditions that we as humans put in place to control one another. It's the them and us mentality, which really keeps us apart. I was telling you that yesterday that I gave birth in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm sure that the same pain was felt by a Dominican woman giving birth in the Dominican Republic at the same time, or in California, in San Diego, at the same exact day and time. When it all comes down to it, we're all the same, but we have this unnatural ability of trying to divide ourselves between those that have and those that have not. And we have this unnatural and uncanny ability to want to accumulate things. We never see a lion in the jungle with 7, 10 carcasses waiting for when I'm hungry to eat. They hunt. Well, the lion doesn't hunt, the lioness does. You know, she hunts, she brings it back, and we all feast and we all eat, and that's it. Then we will hunt when we're hungry again. So there are behaviors that we learn. Discrimination is one of those behaviors. When you see children are truly colorblind, and there are things that we do just because we are afraid that there's not enough to go around, but there is enough to go around. There may not be enough for everyone to be the billionaire, but there is enough for everyone to have 3 meals a day and go on. So if you love somebody, if you love yourself, you don't want them to go without childcare or without medicine or without a roof over their heads. That's why thinking about crises in a way that will allow you to not rebuild but transform is important. You can rebuild what was there that was good, but crises have a way to bring up not only the micro crisis but the inequality and the inefficiencies that are there bubble to the surface. So this is a way to course correct. And when let's not rebuild, let's transform and do things in order to correct those inequities that we have helped to put into place.
Last question, then we'll wrap up. You really appeal to our hearts to be instigators, to use our voice, to speak up, and to take on the responsibility of taking care of who and what we love. That's what I'm hearing. Love somebody, if you love life, take care of it and speak on behalf of it, and don't be complicit in the things working. I'm curious what you've learned about collaboration. Just one key. I know because we're out of time and there's a lot you could say, but there's a call to be the instigator, to be willing to enact change, but that requires us to have collective intention and shared purpose. And so, what's one thing that you've learned about what we can do personally to be good collaborators?
One is to know when you should not be at the head of the table. You set the table with other people from the beginning so that that table is set to service the people that you're there to service with. So it's a call to service. An instigator is really somebody that serves others. And in serving others, look, I love it. In serving others, you serve a part of yourself that needs to be served. So a good instigator is somebody that understands that I don't have to be on the front of the picket line. As long as I make sure that is everybody is on the picket line when they're supposed to. And as long as I make sure that everything is set, and as long as I'm meeting not my needs, but the needs of the people who are in charge of the process. And this comes from a very big respect for people and understanding that people are capable for coming up to permanent solutions to their recurring problems. Most of us don't, there's a saying in Spanish that goes, nadie sabe mejor what goes inside the pot, but the spoon that's moving it. People, our communities know what they need, and communities is not only geographical, right? It's any group of people that come together for a common purpose. So if you are leading because you have a thirst for recognition, sooner or later it's going to show. It's going to show. If you're leading because you see yourself as a platform for other leaders to step over you and claim their space, that's just amazing. It's just amazing to see people that thought they couldn't come up, stand up and speak up and showing the world not only that they can, but they can usher in the next wave of leaders and collaborators.
So be it. So be it. What a beautiful message. Thank you so much for being here. This has been a joy. Julian, how can people connect with you?
Well, you can go to my Facebook. It's Carmen Yulin, but you can write to me. It's CYULIN.CRUZ@gmail. That's my email. It'll take a couple of days to answer, but I answer all of my emails and just look me up in Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I will never call it by that new name.
So be it. Thank you so much. And you've inspired me to use my voice more and be willing to be an instigator. It's a good call to action. So thank you very, very much, and for all of your service, for the beautiful service that you have done. Your whole life is an enactment of service, and you continue to serve and you continue to give, and it's such a blessing. So thank you for having a heart of service.
Thank you. And one last thing, but shout out to all those firefighters that really did a great job and did what most of us could not do, is to run into harm's way to save other people. That is the ultimate act of love. So thank you all for what you do, and thank you for everything that everyone is still doing to make sure that people can overcome what they have been through.
Beautiful message. Thank you. What a wonderful conversation.